the good one, the good recording. So thank you, Rahel, to come in again to the podcast.
No problem.
So
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's been, I was commenting off mic before that it's been like a very long time that I didn't do any recording on any new episode of the podcast. So I'm maybe going to be a little rushed asking questions. I hope it's not too bad for the interview and for you. So my apologies.
I'm sure it will be perfectly fine. We can be very informal, and that's probably better.
Thank you. So what have you been? I mean, it's been like a long time. I mean, well, we talked a little bit this year, but we didn't catch up too much. So what have you been working or what you have been doing?
Yeah, so early in the year, so there's a couple of things happened, right? So we released Little Bird, although, well, we didn't really. Little Bird, the short, which is one of the things I was working on a lot last year. This was shown at the Short Night event. Excuse me. But it is still, and it was shown at CTN, but it's still not up publicly like on Vimeo, which, I'm sure it will be, but, it's still being submitted to festivals and stuff. And Little Bird, the plugin, is coming along too, and that will also be out sometime soon. We're still working on the documentation, which, as you can imagine, it's like, oh, you made this whole thing, the thing's ready. You also have to make it so that people actually can use it.
What's the Little Bird plugin? I think I know what is it, but maybe the people who is listening doesn't know what's the.
Sure, that's a very good point. So I should maybe I should backtrack and explain what I'm talking about. A couple years ago, Chris Perry and I, who've collaborated on a lot of stuff in the past, put together a mega grant proposal to do two things, and one was to make a short in Unreal, and the other one was to make a real-time compositing environment in Unreal, real-time non-photorealistic rendering and compositing environment. And this is not what Unreal is naturally designed to do. And we ended up essentially building this thing, this Little Bird plugin, on top of one of Unreal's existing plugins, Composure, to do multi-pass real-time rendering. So it's sort of like if you have, the standard, passes that you'd expect to take into your compositing app, right? Your sort of standard stuff, including the ability to have separable lights and separable shadow passes and all of the other things that you typically have in a pipeline where you were rendering a bunch of passes and putting them together in a comp, right? But directly in Unreal, multiple renders being done every frame, so that you have a fully real-time compositing environment where you can both manipulate the scene and manipulate the composite. And this ended up working out in some ways very well. I mean, I think we got a look for Little Bird the short that we wouldn't really have been able to achieve otherwise, because when you are going for a non-photorealistic look, it is, your sort of your PBR rendering, right? Your standard approach to rendering is really not the right thing. And that includes things like wanting to have shadows that come from a different direction than the light, that are just used for their graphical qualities, right? Things like rim lights that aren't actually lights, so that you can get that even rim, right? Where otherwise you get like all of the detail in your shading and messing around with normals. And excuse me a moment. I need to clear my throat. Better make sure I do that. Anyway, because I'm going to be doing a lot of talking, right? So anyway, this ended up working out very well. It has some downsides. One of which is it has a real requirement for low scene complexity, which was fine for us, because the way that we were approaching this, and the way I want to approach a lot of stuff in the future, is the characters are CG, the backgrounds are largely paintings. And there's huge advantages, in my view, to doing things that way, in that you don't have to build out your entire environment. You can do this very, very basic thing that you then simply have an art director, in this case, Jill Daniels was our art director on Little Bird, can go in and set the style and set the feel simply by painting the environment. And that's what it looks like, right? And the characters have to sit in that environment and feel like they belong. But it's like Little Bird the short, it's like almost 3 minutes long, I think, and it was done by 3 people. I mean, that's not really true, right? We had people working on the sound, we had someone working on modeling, We had like it's not really that it was just us, right? But the primary aspect of production and pre-production was done by 3 people. And I don't think that would have been possible under any other circumstances. Like, you just couldn't build everything that you'd need for a short that way.
Yeah, that's one of the greatest things of all this real-time technology, especially with Real Engine, that it's facilitating these kind of productions that before were, if not impossible, but way more difficult to achieve. You need more infrastructure, like more like render farms, things like that. Like maybe another team for doing the comp, and another software like Nukes, things like that. So now you can centralize everything in almost 1 or 2 applications, like let's say the main applications. And I guess in the future, maybe 1 only. Maybe we will dig on that later on in this episode. But yeah, and also, well, I'm cheating a little bit here because I'm following your blog, like just to do something bad.com. I think that's correct.
That is what it's called. Yes.
Because for a long time I was searching for, until I remember it. I was just to do something wrong.
Well, you can always go to Anzovin.com and there's a link. So there's also that. But no, it's true. It was perhaps a oddly chosen name. I spent a lot of time trying to come up with other names, and this is the one that stuck with me, both because it's kind of memorable, even if it is easy for people to get it wrong, and because it's, I mean, as should be evident, I think, from the page of the blog, it's a Glenn Keane quote, and it's one of these things that encapsulated for me a lot of these things that I feel is wrong with animation production.
And I really like your blog because I mean, you put a lot of, I mean, I consider you like an artist, but you put a lot of work on technical sides and a lot of work on try to explain to people why you are doing, where are your goals as like an artist, why you do what you do. And that's awesome. I think there is not too many blogs, if more, I will say, than yours that explains this. And not only, I remember I mean, I will put the link on this episode description so the people can access there and probably like scroll on the blog while we are talking maybe. But because you have like, well, you talk about your ephemeral rig, you talk about control rig, that we will talk later on that. You talk also like all this process on the composite with the Little Bird, and you have a lot of breakdowns and things like that. And you have also other technical songs. I remember one that stuck with me the most, like, was on your making of for Little Bird. You talk about the working on variable frame rates or posing rates, I think is what you call it. And but you having like a full animated camera and how to deal with that when you have background context. That was something very interesting for me, like to find out like how you approached that and how you, because here working on anime in Japan, we hit the same like challenges. And it was like very interesting. I shared that with my colleagues at Anima back then, and they were very interested in how you approached that, because we did exactly the same, but we did it in a different way, and it was like a nice fresh like idea that the people were very happy to embrace and to dig on.
So, well, to be fair, I should say I've ripped that one directly off from the approach they were taking on Spiderverse. Like I didn't come up with that, but it was my own implementation.
Yeah, you say that. I remember it stayed there, but I find like some of the things that the like, and maybe this is a bit like controversial what I'm gonna say, but some of the things that I saw in the making of Spiderverse that they claim they invented that. Sorry, but Japanese anime industry doing CG anime been doing that thing for that very long time. Not maybe on the high end of technology that Sonimage Works has, like on the development, but more like brute forcing some of the things, but things like animating lines in on the face and things like that to cheat the look and feel of 2D anime or using a 3D thing. They have been doing that. I was like a little, but that's not fair. It's not crediting maybe all these people, all the animators that doing that. But at the same time, they obviously they push technology quite a lot, because I have to say here that a lot of like your camera thing that I was talking, it was animated by hand, like just making match it. So so there's always this retro feedback. I think that's good, but anyway, I'm going in a tangent. That's the first one.
Well, no, I think it's relevant because like part of the goal of what I want to do here is to look at things like Spiderverse and say or I mean, there's other examples too, like where people are doing really complicated CG solutions for things that are easy to do in 2D, but just doing 2D doesn't get you some of the things that CG gets you, right?
Yes.
So how do you meld those things together in a way that isn't really, really, really expensive? Because I think the problem that you see when looking at things, some things like Spider-Verse would be an example, is they had to put such a crazy amount of effort into making that look and that feel be viable in the CG pipeline. And part of the point of Little Bird was, could we do something that's similarly stylized without paying that immense cost, right? Of going fully through this conventional rendering process fully. And then I can only imagine, right, that they did a very large amount of compositing on that film, right? I can only imagine.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things actually that we encountered this at TTF actually, is that, it used to be that it's like you render some stuff, like you do like a full like path traced set of renders, like whatever they may be. And once they're done, I mean, it's obviously like it's not crazy. It's not like it used to be, right? Like it's not so bad to redo them. Like I can remember like from at the beginning of like in the early 2000s, where it was like, oh god, you have to re-render something. It's not quite as bad as that, but it's still a heavy thing, right, to go back and change that. Whereas compositing is relatively fast. And using Unreal as the renderer flips that completely, right? So the Unreal rendering is very easy to get to your render, right? It's very easy to just spit stuff out to disk. Yeah. I mean, I'm oversimplifying a little bit, because of course, when you want to do something that's truly final quality, it's actually not quite that easy, but it is nevertheless pretty fast. And then the thing that slows you down a lot is Nuke.
Yes, that's true. Also, talking about that and the like real-time rendering and how it's changing many aspects on the industry, because there is one thing also, like going back to your blog, that I think I read it there, maybe it was on the conversation, because the way that you approach animation, it's very shot based, it's not world based. I think you use that word to explain the difference. And I saw the other day there was for instance, this I really love the work from Alberto Mielgo. Obviously, it's I mean his spirit is there on also Spiderverse, but I was surprised with the Jibaro, the latest short film he did. I mean, I was blown away with this short. I showed it to my wife. I'm like, she doesn't like. Look, you need to watch this one, because this is like something that you never saw before, and I was surprised that I think it was with the in this YouTube channel, the corridor VFX or something like that. It's very famous one, and there was the animation and the animation supervisor, one of the animation supervisors on this project from Agora Studios, and he was commenting that the Alberto didn't block the camera until last minute, so they did the animation. Like I thought it was all like camera based, like they did it to look nice to the camera, but no, it's fully animated, so Alberto can adjust and keep adjusting the camera until last minute to make all. I mean, obviously the result, it's amazing, but I was quite shocked on that, because Alberto has a 2D background and like as an animator, and I thought it will be more like you, like the style that he has, that it will be like more shot based, but it's not. And I guess that when you have that on real time, it's, I mean, you can take a lot of advantage on that, on having real time rendering. But in your case, like, because you are like this shot based like kind of approach on your rendering, but it's still like, do you, when you have this freedom to adjust a little bit, because you can do the rendering real, you never change your camera when it's posed, or you have like a process where you balance both like animation and camera, or how do you approach that on your case?
So there's actually kind of two questions here, I think. And one is, where do you start? And the other one is, what can you adjust? So if you're
Exactly.
thinking about like I wouldn't personally want to approach it in the way that, that Alberto Mielgo. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly.
Mielgo. It's
Mielgo.
Spanish,
Okay.
Mielgo, Alberto
I wouldn't
Mielgo.
want to approach it in that way myself. I mean, especially, from a character animation perspective, you're always catering to the camera, right? So there's multiple. So the shot based approach, right? The advantage to that is that there's no assumption of similarity between the actual environment of shots. And especially if you're doing like projected paintings, this makes a lot of sense, because like there isn't anything behind the camera. You couldn't turn it around.
Yeah.
Right? You're just setting up exactly what you need for your specific shots. And the advantage of that is that you get to make these bespoke compositions, right? You put things where they should be for, and I think it goes a little bit beyond that too, because people are like, well, you can shift things around between shots, but the sort of advantage of it is that the only detail that exists is exactly what you need. And this is something that I think is often lost in CG production, where you make a lot of assets and you make them in isolation, and then you like put them together, and then you like light them, and like you have all of this detail that's sort of there all the time. It's baked into your set, your environment. And of course, lighting may reveal or not reveal certain things. Like you're not necessarily gonna see all of it all the time, but it's sort of always there. And that it's less about, it's sort of artistically, where do you want to start from? And the place that I would love to start from with shots is just really big compositional questions. Right? Just like, what should this all look like? Like where should things be, but on this very, very high level, and then only put in exactly the detail necessary. This is one of the things that makes paintings look good, right? Is that the painters mass detail, right? They will add the details just to pick out something for your eye, and not, and like everything isn't equally detailed, right? And of course, in good CG, everything also isn't equally detailed. It's just you get at it in this really a sort of like roundabout way,
Yeah.
instead of being like, I've like maybe set up my cameras and my environment with some simple objects, and like they're just very simple. Like this is how we did it on Little Bird. And then you go in and you just paint, and Jill was able to just paint what she wanted it to look like. And that's very powerful. Like, because Jill didn't have an army of asset artists look deving a lot of things to try to get it to what she wanted it to be. She just painted what she wanted it to look like. And that sort of direct like creation, like in animation and in environment design and in like everything, is what I hope to like go for, and so that's not totally compatible with the idea that you just do anything you want with the camera and push that decision off till like really late, though. I would say that there are advantages, though, also to working in that way, where and I would imagine that approach being more like what people probably do with mocap, right? I mean, certainly I imagine this is how Epic is imagining people using sequencer. Probably a lot of people do, right? You sort of have this whole thing that you've mocapped out, and this is also, mocap or not mocap, like very similar to how things are sometimes treated at TTF, right? You've got like, I mean, you've got like an idea of how you want to stage this thing out, and then you figure out how to shoot it, right? And in that way, which makes a lot of sense for previs for what is ultimately going to be, I guess, semi-live action filmmaking, because of course a lot of the films that TTF works on are like, they're practically animated films in some cases, but like, you get that sense of like, here's a set, here's actors, these actors, we're going to block out their behavior, we're going to block out the beats that they're going to hit, and then we're going to figure out how to best shoot this thing. And I think that's artistically like a completely good direction to go. Like I don't necessarily think that the way I'm proposing here, this bespoke creation, is necessarily superior, but I think it's superior for some kinds of things. You get a different thing out of it, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things I do notice, for instance, about the short that you're referring to, and I'm blanking on its name, but I was comparing it, for instance, to the
Jibaro,
short.
you meant?
Yeah, yes, that's right. I was comparing it to the other short that he did for Love, Death, Robots,
Yes.
where
The Wilderness.
there was a lot more sort of more static shots, and like the style was much more like The Witness, right? The style was much more like, it looked like these were, I mean I don't know exactly how it was produced, but it certainly looked like he could probably gone in and painted a bunch of backgrounds for it.
Yeah, I may be wrong here, but I think it was more like a painted backgrounds.
Right. Yeah, that's sort of what I was imagining too. It's a very different style, right? And they can both be good. It's a question of what you want to get out of it. And the thing that I'm sort of fighting back against is that the approach to real-time CG tends to fall into one of these camps and not the other. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think that we could lose the ability to sort of like serve both these approaches. And I do think that there's just like animated filmmaking, like as sort of a distinct thing from the use of animation in a film of any kind, because of course animation gets used in like many contexts, right? But if we think about like the idea of animated film, then there's this whole tradition of very strong style and very strong sort of graphical qualities to animated film that you know CG kind of lost for a while, actually, in Spiderverse and Arcane.
Yes.
And like, you know, lots. I mean, you know, it's not just those two things, but the two things that are like had the biggest impact, I think, are starting to really bring it back.
Yes.
And it's a very exciting time, actually, because I think that CG had become very stylistically stale, you know, over time, and that's really changing now, and things are becoming much more possible like than they used to be. But the problem is all of this is coming at this huge cost, right? Like in terms of everything, like again, my understanding, and I did not work on this production, right? I'm just going off what other people have told me, right? But my understanding for Spider-Verse is that it was an incredible effort to be able to do this. It would have been much easier for them probably to do the sort of thing that their approach and pipeline were originally geared towards, which is, you know, more conventional rendering, right? And I think there's this possibility, and this crosses over from this question of like, how do you render and generate your images, and it crosses over also into questions of animation, right? Which is, how can we go directly for what we want instead of by a weird circuitous route that was really designed to do something else?
Yes,
right?
That's
I mean, that's all about like sort of the ephemeral approach, is how can you just make the thing you want instead of trying to inch up towards it, right? And it's actually quite interesting what a difference that approach can make. Even, you know, and to a certain degree, even with, I mean, I think that, you know, like you know, the ephemeral tools make this vastly easier, right? But even if you're using a conventional rig, there's questions of sort of psychologically how you think about animation that can change how easy it is to do things, like quite drastically. I can't really talk about any of the productions that we're doing at TTF right now, unfortunately.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.
But I really can't talk about it.
No, just kidding. Don't.
But you know, it's like I probably could try to be really vague, but like this stuff is important. Like security is important in these kinds of productions. So I really,
yes, absolutely.
But I will say that. So here's an example, and here's something general enough that like it doesn't mean anything, right? I actually posted on my blog like years and years ago, and I was like, okay, so there's this idea that you'd hand animate cloth, right? Because one of the questions that came up with the idea of using a variable pose rate, and this is a problem they had to deal with on Spider-Verse, and like, you know, it's like, how do you deal with having, you know, complicated cloth on your character? And I was like, no, you animate that just like a traditional animator does with you know, like traditional animators draw characters with clothing. This isn't actually a huge problem for them. They don't need to simulate it, right?
Yes. Yeah, I can add something there. Well, I was working on these productions for anime style. We don't do cloth simulation. We do all rigged and hand key animated. And yeah, I can assure you can do that. There were some shots in each production that were simulated for some reasons, very, very specific ones, but were like the one-offs, not the general thing. And it's, I will say, it's probably the most difficult thing to do in CG. It's to make it billable. I mean, you can have a good acting, you can have a body dynamics, you can have like a good, like, but I don't know too many animators, honestly, at least here in Japan, that they kind of excel in animating cloth. Like, I mean, they're really good, but some of them are like, this is hanky animated, like, you can't believe it. And this, I rigged these characters, and it sometimes the controls on the cloth doubles the amount of total control that you have on the full body and full facial. Just for the cloth.
Let me say something here, though, because no, by all means, like this is sort of an important part of the conversation, because here's what I discovered. Because what I had said at the time was, well, what if you have long flowing cloth? What if you've got a cape, or you've got a long flowing dress, or you've got like a big trench coat, right? And my answer at the time was, look, there's like 10,000 stories we can tell for characters without characters with capes. Like, just don't have a cape. Like, it's fine. But here's what I have discovered recently. You absolutely 100% can animate a character with a cape or a big coat or like a trench coat type thing. It is 100% reasonable to do, and it's not even that hard if you do it the right way.
Yeah. Yeah, here it was, I mean, I don't know if you are, I'm not like, I like anime and all the kind of animations, but I'm not really like in all these genres and things like, there's one style of anime that's called moe. Before arriving to Japan, I never heard about that, but looks, I mean, it's, people is gonna yell at me if probably saying that, but it is kind of a style that all the girls and all the boys has this kind of flamboyant, like sleeve with several layers and skirts, like looks from, I don't know, Victorian era, something like that, like very over design clothing layered one on top of the other. And yeah, it's kind of I will say impressive when you see the final result from the animators, like how they can pull off that looks like so cool. And it's in a, I will say, no, it's not realistic. I mean, if you go for real cloth simulation, it's not the same, but artistically, like the style, it's super cool. It's super nice how it looks at the end with all the magic on the animator side.
And so what you, at least this is my experience, right? And maybe that you guys treat it differently, right? But my sort of experience with that and what made it reasonable was specifically this idea of, I'm not thinking about the movement of any particular control. I'm thinking about shape and volume. Like, one of the things that is a huge issue with CG is that it incentivizes us, as we understand CG animation now, it incentivizes us to think about the movement of individual controls. And the movement of individual controls, I mean, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, because it contributes to the whole, but it only matters insofar as it contributes to the whole. And so what ends up working out well for this is if you think about your character as a flow of poses, and those poses include shapes that the cape needs to take on in part of that movement. If you treat it all as one thing, not as, I'm animating a character, I'm trying to get a performance, and I'm trying to figure out how the cape reacts to it, that is going to be murder, right? Like, that's going to be really difficult. But if you treat the whole thing as one performance, it actually isn't that unreasonable. Certainly takes longer than if you didn't have a cape, right? It's not like it's not adding extra work, but like, it's the degree to which you can just hand animate that stuff, assuming you approach it the right way, is more than I thought, right? At the time, I was really like, all right, this is going to be great for like normal clothing, but we can't do it for a cape. No, you really can, actually. I don't think that there's any kind of cloth that can be stylized, because of course, here's the thing, like, if you want it to be realistic, no, you absolutely have to use sim. Like, obviously no animator is going to animate realistic looking cloth reasonably. But we're talking about for a stylized case. We're talking about something where the character is not realistic, right? In terms of not realistic cloth, you can get to something that works for long coats and stuff, much faster than I think you might expect. And this is something that I want to explore more ephemerally too, where it's like there are ways of controlling the coat, because here's where it does become awkward, is things like space switching. And one of the things about doing things in this very strict pose to pose manner is that it lets you worry a little bit less about that, but it's still a pain to manage in a conventional rig. Of course, in an ephemeral rig, there is no space switching. So you just get to control things however you want to. And so one of the things that I want to approach, but I mean, I haven't had a chance to really start looking into this yet, but I do want to approach this question of, all right, well, how would you do an ephemeral cape, right? Like how would you set that up in terms of the bottom of the cape? What kind of behaviors would you want it to have built in,
Yes, that's maybe we can continue with talking about like where you're working now, because I think we but one thing
we give you a little off topic, yes.
But no, but because we start talking about ephemeral rig and so on. So, but one thing that we do not, and that's I will not say ephemeral rig, but in the same vibe, it's like we have a lot of tooling for animating the cloth. That's true. I didn't say that when we have the rig, we have the controls, but at the same way, like you on ephemeral rig, you have different controllers for the same like underlying joint structure to deform this thing, and thinking more like a final pose, more that what is the structure there. We do something similar. We were using several in-house tools, some from Joint Studio from my friend Jejero. That's a Korean guy that works here in Japan, and he's really good, and he has a really nice tools on his studio that offers. And also we recently start using more like a ragdoll from Marcus. That it's also really, really, really awesome tool, and because it can be art directed, it can give you this extra like control on your simulated things. I don't know if you had a chance to try it, but it's really cool. And that's ephemeral.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's a kind of ephemeral thing because we mount that on top of the rigs. We do the animation that we need temporarily with that, and then we get a strip of that. I don't know if it's tooling of the rig. I don't know if that, unless it's something in between, I will say, but obviously not the same. But yeah, sorry, you were saying on. Let's continue with ephemeral.
No, I was just all right. I was just gonna say I haven't tried ragdoll, not because it doesn't look really cool, because it actually looks really interesting, but because the kinds of things that I personally want to do, I don't want any kind of sim, right? Like that's sort of an aesthetic choice, right? Like sim doesn't give me the feel that I'm going for, so I just never really even look at it. But that said, I mean, one of the things that I do think is that the relationship between procedural or simulated or ML based, or like the many things that you could do with motion, I mean, this is a hugely complicated thing. I'm going to get off my rant now because of keyframes. Like if we didn't have keyframes, if we had good tools for editing dense motion data, we could use all of these kinds of tools together much more efficiently and easily and effectively. And I used to really think, like I actually did a blog post about this. I was like, these things are really in different worlds, right? Like they're never going to work together. And I've come to think that I was wrong about that. That was left over from the pain of having to deal with things like mocap and deal with stuff that is essentially dense, right? That's inherently it's as samples over time, in the context of conventional keyframes. And actually, if you get rid of that, then things become just much easier to merge together and to work with. Together.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years back, we were talking. I told you like I have this idea for this tool, like to have different layers, blah, 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 and you told me and you talked me out of that completely at that idea. And I say you're right, I'm not doing this because I don't believe anymore on that. And and when you say keyframes, I mean you're still using keyframes, but it's not in the way that is being used with a curve interpolations. I mean, you need to keyframe your pose, but full pose in the, let's say the keyframe in this case will be the frame of animation, like the all style frame. Like, no, that's what.
Right. No, totally. I mean, it is like the terminology is ambiguous. When I'm using the term keyframe, I'm referring to keyframes as we understand them in CG, as like specific values being spline interpolated. Like, yeah, I have key poses, right?
Yeah.
Certainly. Although I think that one important aspect of the way that I'm approaching animation is that what actually is the key pose doesn't have to remain the same.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well,
Because
yeah. Let me think of like a good way to um so when I'm animating, so what here's let me see if I can sort of like come up with a good explanation for it on the fly. When I am animating, right? When anyone is animating in a pose to pose manner, you choose some extremes of motion, right? That you think are going to be your key drawings, your keyframes, your key poses. You pose those out so you can look at them and evaluate them, probably with input from director or supervisor or whatever, and then you start filling in what goes in between, right? So
correct.
here's what I've discovered working that way for a very long time. One of the things that I really want to avoid is getting painted into a corner, right? And this is one of the things that I've always talked about being the problem with keyframes, is that they paint you into a corner. You're making assumptions when you put a keyframe on a particular frame, that that's the right frame for it to be on. That assumption might be wrong, right? But of course, if you just go sliding keys around willy-nilly, your stuff becomes just a mess and you can't edit anything effectively. So
Yes.
so here's what it is. You can't know in advance where your extremes of motion are for sure. You can guess and you can use that as a starting point, but what key poses aren't inherent concepts to motion. What they are is cognitive tools. They're a way of slicing motion into understandable chunks and saying, like, here's a pose, this particular frame, I can think about how this pose is going to go into poses in front of me and how it's going to come from what's behind me, right? It's a cognitive tool. And I may, as I start filling out breakdowns, right? So I have a couple of key poses and I'm going to start putting breakdowns in and I start to see how the motion is shaping up as a result. Inevitably, I'll realize that I wasn't completely correct about some assumption that I made, right? I'll be like, oh, this was the extreme of motion. Well, now that I start filling it in, I feel like that's actually really not quite right. Like, actually, maybe this like 10 frames before is when I really want the arm to come out at extreme of motion, right? But I want to keep the body doing whatever it was doing that I already had and I already liked, right? And so the conventional answer to that is like, well, slide your keys around, and we all know this turns into an uneditable mess, right? But the post-centric way of looking at that is to say, well, we don't actually have anything inherent about these particular poses that says this one is the key pose. If I want to go reinterpolate this hand, like if I was using the ephemeral system, it's very easy, right? If I want to go repose out the hand, or I want to re in between like some section of the hand's motion, I can decide for purposes of doing that some particular pose is my extreme of motion in that hand. That's what I'm going to treat as my key pose. But it has no assumption that that's going to be true in the future.
Yeah.
And so it's this freedom to do what you need to do to make the motion look good, instead of creating baked in assumptions in your shot. This one's the key pose. It's always going to be the key pose, right? And that's a problem, right? And it's a problem in 2D animation too. And the reason why it becomes, I mean, I think the reason why that got codified as how we approach things was actually the structure of a 2D animation studio. And like, I really like 2D animation. Like, obviously, like I get most of my technique and ideas from 2D animation, but like, it doesn't mean that every single thing 2D animation does is perfect. They have their own production pressures. They have their own reasons for doing things that weren't necessarily about what was best artistically, but were about what was necessary to get things done, just like we do, right? And one of those is the idea that like, all right, you have your key poses and then you toss them to an in-betweener. And at that point, the in-betweener is not supposed to be messing around with your key poses, your key drawings, right? But that's not necessarily ideal. It's just how things had to work if you needed a hierarchical structure like that, of like people like passing drawings down to the next person down the line.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I mean, maybe you don't know that, but my first, I mean, I started doing CG long time. Well, I guess like not gonna date myself, but anyway. So the first job I had on the animation industry was not 3D. I went there. I do 3D. I want to work in animation, and they say, yeah, we have work for you, but we do mainly 2D. So if you want to do, I get, well, basically I was doing ink and paint, and copying like the spreadsheets or X-sheets from the animator 2D, so scanning and doing this thing. And because I mean, I think it was a really good experience because I get to learn the 2D workflow, how it works. Even I was not animator there. I was more like a workie. They trained me for one day, and then that was all I need to know for do the job. Anyway, so they did this, like you explained, like these key poses. But even I will go even further. Like they have the layout team. They did the layout key poses. So this character goes here, sits here, say something, goes there, and that was the first like key poses. And that then the animator had to hit that poses with his key poses, and there was the in-betweener that had to fill up the rest. So it was even more like you said, even more strict, because it was not even the animator who set the key poses, but the layout man was very important because it was the one that set the most like important poses that the animators should match, and then the in-betweener, and it was like in between, like then clean up artists, and then came to us and scan and all this. So,
sure. And
then it was people like me that was copying the exits, and hopefully we didn't make any mistake, because it was like taking the paper and just putting the exit with all the layers and things like that. So it was a good learning for timing and interpolation, things like that, because it was like, if we don't mess, because after all that, like a person like me can go there and put everything bad in the computer, and then it goes through the pipeline with a hopeful timing because the last chain failed to copy paste. Anyway, that's,
well, I mean, but that's sort of the consequence, right? Of needing to have your system work that way. I mean, like, just like CG has been shaped by the realities of like, how could you at a particular point in time with a particular like kind of technologies available, like how could you get production done? And CG's been shaped by all the processes have been shaped by the history of like what we had to do to get production done in 1998, right?
Yeah.
And this is the same thing. Like, that structure comes from like, okay, people are drawing on tracing paper. It comes from the realities of 2D animation production, and neither one of these things is necessarily ideal. They're just how you had to make things work, the necessities of making sure productions actually happen. And the thing is, but our the technologies that are available to us today are completely different.
Yeah. Right.
And so I think that probably for lots of kinds of production, I mean, I'm much less familiar with 2D animation from the production side than I am in CG, but certainly for CG, like, we have to take a step back and say, does what we do actually make sense, or are we just sort of been stampeded into it by history? And I mean, I cross that with the idea that maybe we made some bad choices right at the beginning, right? Like, you might have heard this in one of my other rants. I don't remember if I mentioned this to you, but it's like Luxo Jr. kind of set us down a bad path in some ways. And it isn't just Luxo Jr. Like, that's an unfair characterization, because like, you can also look at all the other things that were coming out at the time, like Tony DePeltry and that thing with like the fish and the bird, and like all the like, I don't know, like all of this sort of like very, very early CG. But Luxo Jr. was the first time anyone had done any really good character animation in CG. Like, you look at Luxo Jr. and like obviously it looks kind of old, right? Like, what was one of the big innovations at that time? Self-shadowing, right? So you look back at that and you're like, wow. But frankly, Luxo Jr. holds up. Like, if you were going to animate Luxo Jr. today, I don't know that it would really be that different, right? But Luxo Jr. is also a lamp. And like, what's the best possible scenario for like interpolated keyframes and standard hierarchical rigging? Well, it's something with basically 3 controls, and then you have a ball, right? Like, that's the best possible scenario here. And I mean, I think it really it isn't really true. Like, I'm honestly being unfair here, because the idea of interpolated keyframes didn't arise with Luxo Jr. certainly, and had already started, I think, to be cemented as sort of the way animation was approached. But I think that after that point, it was just like, okay, like, there's no real question about it. And yet then you just immediately go into the system starts to break down, right? Like, IK is essentially an admission that hierarchical rigging is broken. Like, when you get right down to it, like, even IK is an admission that hierarchical rigging is a broken concept. Like actually that's not quite right. It's not a broken concept. It's a concept that's completely like self-consistent. It just doesn't work very well, right? And even in control rig, and I love control rig, by the way. Like I've just started really having the opportunity to use it, and control rig is awesome. Its model of how control rigging should work is very much how it always should have worked. And like I am very much like grateful for that. But there is one thing about it that I don't necessarily like. It still assumes, I mean, and this isn't quite right because they do have all of this like dynamic hierarchy stuff, but there still is a hierarchy. And it's a separate thing from evaluation of the rig. Right. And yes, they have like I'm saying, like they are actually breaking away from that quite a lot, actually. But there's still this like base structure to it. Here's the hierarchy of controls. Here's how you evaluate the rig. I don't see that those two things should be different from each other at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's yeah, definitely. And it's funny. The other day, I think I was also in the I don't use Blender, but I'm obviously I'm very interested as a piece of software, like doing many nice things. And I think in all the they were talking. I was in this meeting that first time I went there was very nice. The people was amazingly kind, and I was just listening there. But I remember like checking the notes and everything. It was your name around there, and the ephemeral rig. It's making echoes in many places. Like they are evaluating new rigging systems and new approaches, and everybody it's. I mean, you making big waves on everybody trying to rethink about rigging right now. That's what
I certainly hope so, because there's really two things I want to get out of this. And one is I want better tools, right? Like one of them is just like I'm frustrated with how rigging tools work, and I'm frustrated with how animation tools work. And I think that there are better ideas that aren't being explored, and I want everybody else to explore them too, right? So that's part of it. The other side of it now, though, is like now I'm like now we need to in order to be able to continue the kind of development that I want to do, like Notional Pipe, and we're starting to do that. I mean, we just released Contour, right? But like Notional Pipe has to be able to like bring out products and start making money, because you need money to be able to
by the way,
further
just
development.
For the people who doesn't know, Notional Pipe, it's the studio that Raf and Tagore, I think it's
yes, Tagore Smith and Brian Kendall. It's not a studio, to be fair. It's a software company. Like we're not doing production.
Okay.
We are producing animation tools. Like that is basically our thing. And we have come out with Contour fairly recently, and people are starting to use it in some productions, and we're very excited about that. But we want to keep going further. We want to bring ephemeral we want to bring actually both Contour and the ephemeral system to Unreal. That's kind of my sort of hope for the future. But what I was going to say is basically like now I'm sort of getting to like the hard part of like I have all these ideas and people are excited about them, and I'm tremendously excited and grateful about that. But now I'm just sort of like I also need to turn this into like something that's going to be able to sustain more and more of the kind of development we need to do, because I feel like we've just scratched the surface of what is like theoretically possible with these concepts, right? Like this is a tenth, like the stuff that we've done so far, and the stuff that like we've shown so far is a tenth of what's possible. And but getting there is going to be hard, because it's this problem of it's the same problem people are facing in their transition to Unreal or real-time workflows in general, or in their transition. It's just sort of like, you gotta somehow change your approach to something better without destroying your ability to do the work you need to do while you do that. And that's hard. It's a really hard problem, actually. Like this is one of the reasons why, I've often had this conversation with animators, and I fully understand where they're coming from, where they're like, this is all really interesting, and like maybe this is how things ought to be in the future, but like I can't see how we get from here to there, because we have work that needs to get finished today. Right.
So what's cooking on the kitchen right now? If you can talk about a little bit, like
sure.
Obviously,
I absolutely can.
We want to talk about Contour rig, but how it's going also ephemeral rig, and what are your ambitions or your goals for the next years, or whatever you can say. I don't want to.
No. Like obviously there are things that I'm not going to talk about, but there's plenty of things that I can do. I'd already sort of started to, like, or at least some of the places we want to go, right? So we released Contour, And that was a big step because that's Notional Pipe's first like released product. And Contour's been in development for a very long time, intermittently. Contour's been in development in some sense for like 12 years. And it's not like that was constant development, quite the opposite, right? A lot of the reason for that is that, well, it's exactly what I was just talking about. Like we had to keep halting what we were doing to, you know, have jobs and make money. And
I feel you.
and you know, we started out at Anzovin Studio, right, where
Mhm.
this was kind of going to be like the next setup machine. And this as often happens, right? And I didn't understand this well enough at the time because there's a lot that I learned since then about like, you know, a lot of it from Tagore and Brian about like how does software work, right? What are some of the potential pitfalls? Because the products that we had done at Anzovin Studio before that time were considerably smaller in scope, right? We weren't writing, I mean, we actually were writing our own deformers. In some case, Brian wrote a deformer for the face machine that was actually quite impressive. But for the most part, we were doing these auto rigging tools, right? We were doing like kind of smaller things. I don't think I understood what it would take to scale up to really challenging the question of how you do deformation in animation, right? That was my goal. And it still is. It's like what we do now is not good. Let's do a better thing. But I didn't understand what that meant in terms of like what was going to need to the resources that were going to go into a production like I should say production a project like that, right? So what happened was, you know, we did a bunch of work on it, and then we needed to do some work on other stuff because, you know, we needed to keep the lights on, and we did some work on it, and we needed to do some work on other stuff. And then Anzovin Studio failed as a company, and that certainly put you know, a stop on things for a while we all figured out what we were going to do next. And we, you know, with Tagore very much in charge now, because he understands, I mean, he understands software development at a far like more, you know, in far more detail than I do, right? You know, he is a developer in a way that I'm not. We were able to sort of pull this back, you know, we put this back to the Notional Pipe back together as a company, and you know, and now we have released Contour, which, you know, for a while there was definitely a period of time where I was like, I don't think this is ever going to get released. Oh my God, this is all going to go to waste. But thankfully, yes, we have now released it. We have some customers, and we're going to build on that. One of the things we're going to do soon, and I cannot put a date on anything, right? Because it still isn't like we're all full time on this all the time. I mean, I'm working for TTF at the same time. You know, Tagore's got his own stuff, Brian's got his own stuff, right? But on the other hand, that's actually in some ways a big advantage, which is that we're not in this position where like we have to get venture capital or we're going to die tomorrow, right? We are instead in this position where like, well, we have this thing that's kind of sustainable in some ways, right? Now, obviously, it means that we can't do, like, there are things we can't do because we're not a larger company, right? There are things we can't do because we're not all full time all the time, right? But like, the balance on that is that we are much less threatened by the possibility of like, you know, falling apart the way that Anzovin Studio did, right? You know, we're not really in that position. So it's a bit of a trade-off, and at some point that's probably going to change. But like we'll start, you know, being able to, you know, form it into more of a you know, software company with, you know, full-time employees. But at the moment, this is actually working out quite well. We've been able to deal with the support of Contour pretty effectively. So one of the things that I want to do next is the way we released Contour is that we released it first with the idea that Contour is a you know, it's a set of tools, right? A set of tools that a TD, a rigger, like the term TD has now turned into like 10,000 things, so I probably stop saying that, right? Is going to use to rig a character. And one of the things that sort of has become clear in my discussions with people is that it's easy for me to lose sight of how difficult it is to do even fairly basic rigging things for people who are unfamiliar with character rigging, right? You know, and so I was sort of, this is easy enough that an animator who didn't understand rigging all that well, right, could probably build a rig. And the answer is that's not quite true, actually. What animators really want is the kind of thing that the setup machine provided, and that, you know, in many ways MGear provides, right? Which is put something in your character, right? Like with some kind of guide or something that lets you adjust it and have it just rig, right? Have it make me the rig, and then maybe I have to deal with the deformation. Now, the nice thing is this is actually, relatively speaking, an easy thing to add to Contour, which is not really a fair point, because nothing in this world is actually easy, right? But comparatively, it is, because so much of the functionality you want out of a rig is built into the contour deformation and the spline behavior. So it's like a tenth of the size of like a normal auto rig system, maybe less, right? And I'm also going to, I'm not necessarily, we're not necessarily going to build it as a normal auto rigger either. Because, and this was already true of the setup machine, although at the time it was more of something of expedience, and now I think it's actually the right thing, is that I really think that it, moving away from auto rigging as such, as we understand it, right, is the right thing to do, right? Like scripts that build stuff. And one of the things I love so much about control rig is that control rig doesn't treat things that way, right? Your script is your rig. Your rig is a program. And so like we'd probably build something that's componentized. It wouldn't be like, in a conventional auto rig system. But regardless, one of the next things is probably going to be to build tools on Contour that are more animator facing, right? You just pop this into your character, right? Which, again, I can't put any particular date on that or anything, but that's certainly one of the next things we want to do. And just to be completely clear, right? Like, I don't make any promises about anything I'm saying here, right? Like,
Yeah,
this is all
this is all
like
disclaimer, like safe harbor disclaimer,
if like I don't really, I mean we don't have like the kind, like we're like public companies have to be super careful. We're obviously not a public company, right? But nevertheless, just in case it was in any way unclear, like I'm not promising anything I'm saying here. I'm just talking about what our ideas are, right? And I'm not promising at any particular time, and like, that's sort of the way it is. But that's definitely like a good idea of one of the things we might do next. We're gonna we're continuing to work on the ephemeral system, and continuing to bring it closer to something you could use in production. It already is to a certain extent now, but there's still plenty of work to be done on it. It's a difficult thing to fit this into Maya's world, and there's lots of ways that, because it breaks the assumptions, right, of most rigging and animation systems. I am excited to potentially work on it in the context of Unreal, where I think it will not break the assumptions so hard, right? Like control rig is going to have much easier time dealing with something that is sort of inherently circular than Maya's node graph is, which really, really doesn't like that, right? But nevertheless, there's probably, I'm sure that wouldn't be like, there'd be challenges there too, right? But I definitely think that, it's an exciting direction to potentially go. Hey, why don't I show you real quick, like this is the latest like ephemeral stuff,
please.
Which is quite a bit further along than when we last talked. Although, like I said, there's still plenty to go, right, before it's something that we want to like put out there in the world and be like, yeah, people should use this. That said, if anybody wants to get in touch with me and be like, we're actually interested in the near future, there are some possibilities around that, but certainly it's not something that we're going to give out to the world at large. Like, you would need support from us, I think, at this time in order to be able to use it effectively, but yeah, let me share my screen. This one is actually a conventionally control rigged but contour rigged character, but then I've got this dude, this weird rabbit dude, and this is actually the same bit that I did. You can actually, if you go to the Notional Pipe YouTube channel, you can watch. I streamed myself animating this whole thing, actually. Now, it is ridiculously long. It's like the stream, because we ended up stopping to just like talk about stuff constantly, and it's just like the stream got very, very long. So if somebody wants to sit there for like 10 hours, not all at once, of course, this was over many sessions, and watch me animate this thing and also rant a lot, like, that might be educational, I don't know. But like, this is an example of, something animated fully with the ephemeral system, using a lot of the new approaches to like, how would you do interpolation with it? Like, because we're kind of abandoning the term interpolation list, actually, because there is interpolation. It just doesn't work like the interpolation you're familiar with. And so, and also just the fact that here, let me just turn on curves. There's now much better information about how the ephemeral system is actually going to behave. So you see all this like color coding and stuff. So what this is saying is like, this is how various things did to what I currently have selected at this particular time. If I switch ephemeral modes, then the colors change to say, oh, these are all forward of my current thing, and so they're gonna, they're gonna act that way. Or if I switch to forward all mode, the whole body's going to. Oh yeah, like the cube too. Like let me just turn off glue for a second, so it's just the character. I mean, that's another sort of interesting thing in the various ways that we now have, the ability to attach things and unattach them from each other, and the ways that that's quite different from the usual CG way of thinking about this. So like one example is something that's permanent, right? So that's actually how this works. So we've got this whole thing set up where I've set up some controls to let you pivot the cube from any base. And these, from an ephemeral point of view, this is very easy. You just have like, you do whatever you want. These are very easy to set up because all it is a bunch of controls with bidirectional relationships with the cube. And you can do those on the fly that basically do the same thing. Here, one second, yeah, there we go. Whatever. In that I now have a relationship set up that can be turned on and off with here's like all three things sort of hooked up to each other, because that's meant to be used on poses where we have, we want to manipulate the cube with the hands coming with it, or vice versa, right? You can do it from the cube, you can do it from the hands, doesn't matter.
That's
And
great.
the bit that's important here, though, is that this isn't something you animate on and off. So one of the things that people often look at this and they're like, oh, this is great. When on the frame where his hands contact, like I want to be able to turn on that relationship on this frame, on this pose. And I don't want to do that. And the reason I don't want to do that is it starts building up that cognitive load of relationships in the shot, relationships between animating objects that the animator has to hold in their head to be able to get anything done.
Yeah, you need to remember the config. I mean, it's not only the animation, but also the configuration on the specific frame.
Right. That's right. The configuration on the specific frame. And so for an example, the way the control rig handles space switching is really superior to the way that Maya does it, right? Like, well, I mean, I to be fair, Maya doesn't have any explicit space switching feature. You can make a rig that does that, but you're sort of left to your own devices. But control rigs space switching is very nice in that it maintains a relationship between your object in these various spaces. But it still means that you have something changing in the rig that's changing at a particular time. And so you have to remember that that's happening, right? You have to think about that. And here it isn't. It's just like, well, for whatever operation I want to do right now, right? Like I've got, like for this operation, I want to do that, right? I want to do that. But let's say I have something where, and then I'm back here and I just turn it off, and now it isn't, right? And so I choose the way that something behaves for the operation I am doing right now, and it carries no implications for what I am going to do in the future. And that's, I think, this really foundational change to the idea of how you think about character motion. There's no settings. There's no well, that's not, I mean, there's some settings, right? But they're all well, ephemeral, right? They're all just sort of like you set them to be whatever you want right now. It has no implications, doesn't change anything, right? And that's also sort of another way of looking at this. Nothing you do ever changes anything but the thing you are explicitly changing. But here's what we're starting to build now. It's not what you're explicitly changing doesn't have to just be one pose. It could be a lot of poses at once. And that's where the power of the idea of like, I can manipulate this however I need to in this particular moment, and it doesn't have any implications for what's in the future, like I think will come to the fore. So like here's my like weird little demo that I often give about how this works. If I've got the whole character, right? Like here's oops, I wanted to turn off. So here's where there is a setting, but it's just a setting for how I control things, right? So I'm just like, no, I'm going to turn off isolate rotation because I want to move the whole character around, like, the whole thing. And this is one of the things that's always painful for polish. This is my dumb little demo that I accidentally did this on stream, and I was like, wow, this makes a great example. So characters going over there, characters going over here, right? You've got these three very different poses, characters like changing their body the whole way, right? And let's say I in between that. So now I'm generating a bunch of in between poses. So this is like similar to, but I'm generating them in a particular mode, the same mode that I use to turn the entire character. So the entire character uses itself as an FK chain to be, sort of rotate. So the interpolation is also done that way. But I can choose to do interpolation a totally different way. If I switch to default, which is more of an IK mode, and I chose to do my in-betweening now, I'd get a totally different result, right? So now, I mean, it's probably pretty evident when you look at this foot that now it's going in a straight line instead of a curved. So it's curved here because it's FK, and then for this bit that I just did, it's IK. And so the feet are moving in a straight line and stuff. But regardless, you do have this issue of here's our hitting a wall, right? Here's our stuff doesn't look very good. So if I switch back to all, right? So this is sort of I'm moving the whole thing in this very simple FK mode. I can choose to smooth that over, right? I can do like this, and I can apply a filter to it. I can smooth over time. And so that's going to solve a lot of issues that you might have. You can sort of spot correct stuff, but I'm applying it at this time to the entire character as if the whole character was FK. Which you can see that this hand still hits a wall, right? This is still not going to look very good. So I just switched myself to an IK mode, and now I'm going to do not the whole body. So the whole body isn't going to change. I'm just going to smooth the hand when it hits that particular point. And now I essentially have the same motion, but I've gone in, found a particular issue, and without concern for how other objects affect the hand, because I switched myself to a mode where they didn't, right? Because when I did my initial FK base smooth, I said, I'm doing this in FK, therefore the whole movement of his body, like the rotation of his body, which is also being smoothed, is going to affect the hand. And then it ended up giving me kind of like a weird looking result, as would often happen in scenarios where you're like, oh, I'm like messing around with the movement of my pelvis or whatever, if you've got a standard FK reg, and the pelvis looks good, but now that as a consequence of whatever it is I did, now the hand doesn't, right? Like that's a very, very normal issue to have if you're trying to polish stuff and it's in FK. Here, by the fact that I can swap to IK without changing the motion in any way whatsoever and simply make an alteration to the hand now in IK space so that it is not being affected by the body, but it changes nothing else, right? And then the point here is all I have now is I have a whole bunch of poses. I have not made nothing I did here has an implication for how things can be adjusted or how they should be adjusted in the future.
I see. Yeah, it's very interesting. I didn't, for sure. I'm sorry, I didn't watch. I didn't have time to watch the Notional Pipe YouTube channel. It's in my to-do list. I follow you, but I'm subscribed.
Oh, sure.
But yeah, definitely.
And I haven't watched all of your podcasts either, again, because I've been busy, right? It's like, believe
but
me,
definitely I see a big change in terms of the approach, the workflow that you showing me here now, and the refinement that you have of the tool right now compared to the first iterations I saw some time ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely it's something like you say, like there is also, like, I guess, this learning curve that the people needs to embrace and get used to that, because obviously if you get, the animators go with the mindset of oh this doesn't look like what I'm used to, yeah, it's not gonna be good for them. But for what I see here, it's very straightforward. It's very, very simple to understand the concept of, like, the important thing is the pose, is the shape that you get on the character, not the configuration of your rig. And
yep.
all these tools, like when I'm saying all the tools, like the controls that you have on all these left panel tools that you have there, are just to help you to pose that and to interpolate from one pose to another to get some work done for you. So you don't need to repose every single thing in every pose. But I mean, I think it's very, very easy to understand and very approachable in terms of like if you are willing to try like different approaches for your animation. Definitely, it looks very. At for me, I'm talking about like I'm not an animator, so maybe someone is
Sure. No, and I mean, like obviously, it is the kind of thing where like there is absolutely a barrier, and I think of this as being sort of the animator like PTSD to a certain extent, which is to say, when you're an animator and you had to learn to get your head around animation concepts the first time, right? Like, you know, and especially you're doing things in the graph editor, you're doing things, you're thinking about things like rotate order, which like doesn't exist in the ephemeral system. There's no such thing as rotate order. Like one of the things that's maybe worth noting here when I did this thing where I did the smooth is that when I'm applying essentially a filter to the motion, I'm not applying it to a particular channel because there are no channels. It's being applied to the pose as a whole. And that's an easier concept, I think, to get your head around. But the first time you had to deal with stuff like this, you were definitely dealing with the graph editor. Even if you had instruction that did focus on poses, at some point you had to deal with the graph editor. At some point you had to deal with rotate order. At some point you had to deal with layering. At some point you had to deal with like the consequences of one body part affecting another body part, the consequences of weird interpolation, the consequences of all these things. And it's painful and it's difficult to get through that stage of doing of having to force yourself to your head to sort of make sense of all of this in order to be able to get to the important part of animation that's all about performance and what you're attempting to create, right? That's about your character's state of mind. Like that's the actual important part. But you had to go through all this other stuff. And so when animators look at new ways of doing things, what they're often worried about is like, I remember how painful it was to have to learn an approach to animation the first time. And I've got deadlines, right? Like I need to produce animation and I need to produce it well. And I know I can do that this way, even if it's painful. And I'm afraid that if I let myself do something really off the beaten path, like I will miss deadlines. Right, I will be unable to produce the work that I'm being paid to create. And it's a very understandable fear, right? Like I can hardly blame anybody for being afraid about that, right? But it's something that over time, like, has to be overcome. Just like in modeling and rendering, like the approaches that we originally took, like made way for. I mean, it was sometimes painful to do so, like, and sometimes it was a legitimately scary thing for people. But like, I've just like, I've been around long enough to remember when. I mean, I've been around long enough to remember when NURBS modeling was the prominent way to do characters, right? Like,
with Hash Studio, it was the name.
That's right. And then hash patches were like, which were. Now we're really talking about like ancient history. So many people, and we probably don't have time to get into explaining like that whole thing. But like the point is that, and then seeing that make way for subdivision surfaces, and then seeing that make way for ZBrush and sculpting apps and stuff that was just like a drastically different way of thinking about modeling, right? And it was painful, but it was necessary. We wouldn't be able to do the kinds of things that we do today if we were still modeling the way we did in like the late 90s. But we kind of are still animating like we did in the late 90s, So anyway, that's my usual rant, and nothing that anyone who hasn't heard me rant hasn't heard before. So I probably, I should probably stop giving the same rant every time. But yes,
a good reminder.
One thing that has been happening is a lot more work has been done on the ephemeral system. It's much more advanced now. It's getting much closer to being something that I think might be production ready. But like I said, there's still plenty still to do on it, I think, before it's really ready to be like a product.
One thing, I'm sorry, maybe I'm cutting here for your train of thoughts, but this character also, it's using contour rig. So that's
right,
important.
It is.
I wanted to just point that, and maybe you can show a little bit also on that part, because so the people understand that we are seeing here not only the ephemeral part, but also like contour rig, how it simplifies the.
Yep, exactly. I mean, and they work
information.
together very well, in part because, at least as the ephemeral system is currently constituted, it does not assume any that there are any limits on character motion or like how you can stretch the rig. Like the ephemeral system explicitly does not assume that there are. Like there probably aren't, right?
Okay, I'm just gonna ask probably something that will be silly or sound silly, but do you have any joints on this character, or it's just the splines and the control for control?
It is all splines. Now, of course, those are kind of joints because we have kind of our own form of joint that exists to control the spline, but certainly not joints as we know them, right? Like this is all splines. Well, that's not quite true. There's the eyes, but you know, almost all splines. And so it's important to sort of do that because like look how it's just like you're allowed to just sort of like do whatever, right? Contour is gonna respond to this very gonna respond to practically anything you do pretty effectively. So here let me just like actually let me switch over to, well no, I'll show it here first. Actually, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the ephemeral system, because one of the things I want to show about Contour is that it's fast. And the current version of the ephemeral system imposes some performance questions. They're not horrendous, but one of the things we want to do certainly is make it more performant. And now you can see like, yeah, look at that, like 120 FPS or whatever I'm getting, right? Contour is very, for what it does, like the algorithm is certainly more complex than regular linear blend skinning, but for what it does, Contour is extremely fast. And I've done stuff with really complex rigs in Contour, doing stuff that would be very difficult to do in a performant way with a conventional rig. Maybe, yeah, maybe you can flip it around if you go too far with the twist, but would be very difficult to do with a normal rig, but where because it is Contour, I'm getting like 60 FPS with parallel eval, because it works very nicely with parallel eval. It's very parallelizable. But yeah, I mean, this is all like spline based, and it's just being controlled by the ephemeral controls. Now, neither of these two systems actually require each other or anything, right? You could have a regular deformation underneath a ephemeral rig, and you could have, you know, like here, let me show you an example, because here's my other thing that I had brought up for this purpose. Like here's a more conventional like control rig. So this is like FKIK. It's pretty much like the things you'd expect, right? You know, sort of more common control rig, but it's a Contour rig, right? So it doesn't require, you know, the ephemeral system, and the ephemeral system doesn't require Contour, but they do work together very nicely. So what we're looking at here, let me actually put what am I doing? Sorry, it's kind of late for me. I want to restore the Contour shape nodes, which will take a second. There we go. Here, let me just let me hide the radius indicators. This is what's actually going on in the character, right? You know, it's like here is these are all splines. They're being controlled by these joints that sort of draw the spline, but like ultimately what's controlling the mesh is a bunch of splines, and they can control each other too. So like we have this big this system where we have like splines that are doing kind of these like pseudo muscly things being controlled by like the spline that controls, oh yeah, it's not in FK mode right now. Being controlled by the spline that controls the arm and deforms the arm. It's also sort of pulling these things around with it. We have a constraint for that. And like basically these like pretty complicated things that are pretty easy to do if you sort of have spline based rigging as sort of the base assumption of your rigging approach.
And also it solved really well the like volume preservations in articulation areas and things like that, twisting. Like for instance, if you move like the pelvis, like the leg up on the pelvis, like this area that is always very difficult. Like if you rise one of the legs,
yeah, let me just
that probably it's one of the I remember I saw it somewhere on one of your videos, like yeah, this kind of volume preservation there, and there is no corrective lane shapes, nothing there, just
that's right.
Pure,
now there is actually in this case down in this area in the region, well, sort of the crotch region in between the two legs, I am using a little bit of delta mush, because which works very well with Contour in the areas in between the splines, because this whole area is getting nice spline deformation and this leg is, but then you've got a region in between. So it's not quite true that there's nothing else going on here, but there's very little other stuff going on.
Well,
right? For the most part,
delta
this
mesh
is just like,
way
this is what it looks
easy
like.
to apply. I mean, it's not like doing a set of corrective plane shapes just to.
Nope.
To
it's just
there.
This is basically behavior that falls out of contour. Not quite. I am actually using a corrective blend, for instance, and this is probably going to be useful to talk about. I'm using a corrective blend on the elbow. But what the corrective blend does is much simpler than what your average corrective blend often does in a rig like this. So I'm just going to turn off the corrective blends. And you can see that, like, it's still working pretty well. I was using it to like squish the arm up against the other part of the arm up a bit here. And I was using it to like get a little bit more arc direction on the exact shape of the elbow. But like even turning off the corrective blend, I'm still getting this really nice result. It's it's nice to be able to have like this very direct artistic control, but you get to put it on top of something that already does a lot of the work for you.
And I see you put it, so it's a plane shape post deformation. So how you have the space for this one? I'm just curious. Do you using like the like any?
Let me show you.
Okay, thank you. I'm just.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. What I have here, because we talked about how there are constraints that are built into the system too. I have a couple of constraints. We actually have a little tool that adds these automatically. We have these constraints that are constrained to the spline. And so, because here's the thing, we wouldn't want to use the actual joint angle or control angle to control the PSD, because if we did, we wouldn't get this, which is you can bend the arm like this. And if I like, as the acuteness of this bend is what matters, right? In terms of what the corrective blend is actually doing. The acuteness of that bend is what matters, not the actual rotation of this particular control, right? You could get an acute bend in all kinds of different ways.
I see.
So by having a, like these locators that are attached to the spline that are used both to be that's the space, like the second one I think is the one that I used, is the space that the blend shape, post deformation blend shape is being applied to, or applied in. That's one use, but the other use is I'm using the rotation values of this locator that's basically taking on the tangency of the spline to drive the PSD, so that the spline tangency is what matters, not the rotation of any particular control.
See, that's great.
And so that way, it's like, yeah, you make it acute, it's going to do the thing, no matter what reason you made it acute.
No, but one of my questions were when you apply the post deformation blend shape, the correction, you have several spaces. So you have the tangent space, you have another joint space, or another transformation space. I was wondering, because when I tried that, especially if we use I think it's called the tangent space, that basically is reference to the base of the position of the vertex. So like kind of a normal transformation there, like it used to jump quite a lot depending on your
it sure does. And the reason for that, we actually wrote a PSD that actually I believe it is in here under experimental, but we don't use it very much. We do want to eventually take that because it was only partially developed when Autodesk released theirs. We were like, well, look, we're doing this really unique thing with the spline-based deformation. It makes more sense for us to focus on that than on a feature that Maya is already providing, right? So we sort of stopped development in our PSD, but we'd already encountered that issue, which is if you do something in tangent space, you're going to have issues because the tangency, the normal, actually, it's like the tangency doesn't flip, but the normal does, because they're both important for this. Anytime the mesh interpenetrates.
Yes.
And there are theoretical solutions for that, I think, probably involving using multiple sampling in multiple places, I think, is maybe one of the ways that in order to, because you need to construct a frame, right, for the PSD to operate in. And or that particular vertex's deformation to operate in, and the frame being constructed from the tangent and normal at a particular point has this issue of things flipping around. Looking at multiple ones can maybe mitigate it. Like there's a variety of possibilities, right? But it's not like a super easy problem to solve. and they sort of didn't try to solve it at all. So I almost always use transform space one shapes. Transform space one shapes work great, but they have two major issues. Issue number one, Maya does not include any tools to mirror them. I wrote a script to do that. It's really ugly, but it works. And I do want to maybe clean it up and make a better version of that tool to release publicly, because the fact that Maya cannot mirror transform space one shapes is, I think, the main reason why people don't use them. And then the other thing is that up until fairly recently, transform space one shapes were pretty crashy if you were using GPU override. Which, I mean, maybe just don't use GPU override, but like,
I tried
it
to
was
avoid
kind of
it.
an issue. Yeah, I know. Like
Normally,
that's the same thing I did. I just didn't use GPU override.
It's a complicated relations, I will say.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Right. I mean, man, I wish that I wish they'd actually. I mean, they did eventually fix that, by the way, in 2022, though. But it was an issue at any rate. Yeah, I mean, the possibilities in terms of how fast you can get to a good result are very, very significant. I mean, I would say that depending on the circumstances, when you're aiming for something flexible, or when you need, like, even if you aren't, right, the volume preserving deformation, I mean, this can sometimes shave weeks off the rigging process and get you a better result than you probably would have gotten even with the full process, right? Because you can still use all of your other tools, and it works very well with PSDs as long as they're post deformation blend shapes, and you can still like use a lot of tools to like get very careful art direction on your stuff, but you're doing it over this really stable basis that gives you this nice volume preserving deformation. So that so here's another way of putting it: instead of having your PSDs exist to fix problems and you need a million of them, they exist for art direction purposes, and you only need a few. Like, it's gonna be way easier, right? And here's the other thing, like really, when you think about it, you get all of this really nice stuff out of it. So, like here's like, and this is all no PSDs here, right? This is just like default contour deformation. And here's something that you might not think that you need for a finger, but then you discover that you do. You can just stretch it. Right, it's a spline. You can stretch it. That's basically a control point. And, if you encountered a situation where, and this is something that can be very actually important for hand poses, right? Where it's like, you have this really specific pose, especially if your character's stylized. But even if it isn't, it's a not uncommon, right? You receive a mesh, you close the character's hand into a fist, you discover that it looks a little weird. Yeah. Here, you can just, if you're an animator and you discover that, you can just sort of directly go and fix it, right? Even in a realistic context, if it's not going to be too noticeable that you cheated. And that's almost a even more important thing, in that if you were to construct a rig in which every part of the rig you assumed was stretchy, right? Including like every part of a finger, right?
Yeah.
Your rig would become real complicated.
Yeah, if I told you like how many times, like where you need like and the classic rigging style with M-Gear and other systems, like obviously you plan ahead, like, okay, this is gonna need to be stretched, this is gonna be, because stretching can be done in several ways. You can scale, you can move, you can when you scale, you can scale maybe in one axis, in 3 axes at a time. Normally 3 axis is not as a big issue, but sometimes if you didn't plan like to be this control be scale in only one single axis, then is when you get in troubles, like.
Sure. But even so, like, even if you had like one bone here and you stretched it, like chances are, like you're even if you were scaling a one bone, say, you're going to push some points in the other direction, right? Like, you're going to have to deal with all of these issues. Or you could have a bunch of bones, then you have to have some system to control them, and it gets really complicated, and your rig now has like, it's like 10 times more complicated, right? It's like there's not a case in which you just sort of get that and you don't have to pay some kind of significant price for it in sort of conventional rigging. Whereas in the case of Contour, it is an inherent part of how the deformer works, and it's never really an issue to have that ability. You just always have it if you need it. And I think this sort of gets at part of the idea that I want to sort of present through, that I think Contour presents, which is the idea that we are not using good rigging primitives, right? Like our primitive in rigging is just a transform, like in conventional terms, right? And that's for deformation, and it's also for the way that the rigs themselves behave. Controls are transforms, etc. Everything's a transform, and I think at least when it comes to deformation, and maybe in other cases too, transforms actually make very bad primitives for rigging purposes. And surfaces and splines make much better primitives. Their qualities are different, right? And so I tend to, what I tend to do in rigs is I make heavy use of Contour, like no surprise there. I also make pretty heavy use of wrap deformers. And I also make pretty heavy use of very low res geo, where I'm essentially saying I'm going to treat this like it's a wrap deformer, but I'm not going to actually need a wrap deformer because I carefully topologize the geo to have only the exact verts that I want, right? So that's sort of a way of using the mesh's surface itself as a rigging primitive.
Yeah, definitely.
That's what I've been doing facial rigging these days.
Sorry, I think I had a hiccup on my internet. I hope.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't hear the last sentence.
Oh, sorry. I was saying,
you say something about facial.
I was saying that's how I often do facial rigging these days, which is that, and we're putting that into practice at TTF too. We topologize faces very carefully so that we don't actually need, so the way I often approach faces, I often use a wrap deformer because I want just as the qualities of a spline are very much the right thing. Like one of the realizations that led to Contour is like basically every part of a character is a spline, right? The torso's a tube, right? Torso's a tube, right?
Yeah.
Fingers are tubes, arms are tubes, legs are tubes, everything's a tube. If you have a good way of deforming tubes, then you can solve a lot of rigging problems if you just solve the tube deformation problem. Now, faces, some things do work that way. Like eyebrows, Contour is often quite useful for. Splines are often the right thing for that. But your cheeks and mouth area, they are more dimensional in a sense, right? They aren't things that bend; they're things that stretch. And there is where I think a surface is the right rigging primitive. But and a wrap deformer can provide that surface, but it's even better for performance if you can get the mesh to do it itself. And actually, let me see if I have. I actually could show you. Actually, I don't know if it'll open up in 22. This is kind of an old file, but let me actually go show. I didn't really think I was going to show this, so I didn't really keep it around. But
don't worry, we can blur.
Yeah, we can. Like,
it doesn't work.
We're like running a little time anyway. But that's how like Aaliyah's face works in Little Bird, where I topologized it so that it's got the number of edge loops around the mouth that I would want as controls.
I see. So
that's like
great.
It's like 5 across the top and 5 across the bottom or something like that. And so you get, with very little effort, really nice deformation out of that, because some of your deformation is actually coming from the subdivision surface.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, and I do many of the things that you do. Like many situations, I use a lot of like wrap deformers and doing like proxy geometries to even as a more classical rigging approach, like even for skinning or things like that. I sometimes when depending on the character, I do my proxies just to do the skinning, and then I transfer everything, or for corrective lane shapes and so on. Because you see, you taking a workaround, it's taking a long time. No, it's not true. At the end, probably it's faster. I'm pretty sure on time it's faster, and the results are much better because you have a more optimized base to work on, and then you transfer to the other, especially when you have like,
That's right.
cloth details, layers, oh, I can say that one, like details that very highly detailed things that it's hard to maybe do a corrective range shape on top of that, for instance. So you just go and do your proxy that it's, or if you don't have a symmetrical geometry or topology for some reason. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the sort of thing where like, and I do that all the time too, because it is by far the most efficient way to weight a variety of things when I have to do things conventionally. The nice thing about wrap deformers is you get correct. So if you've got like a thick clothing, right, you get that effect of,
that's one.
You don't have to really worry about matching all of the weights. You don't really have to worry about, and you don't really have to worry about, your thickness is always going to remain normal to the actual surface, right? Whereas with weights, you're not really guaranteed with that, right? I mean, this is sort of what I'm talking about like, transforms and linear blend weighting being a bad primitive.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you can. Yeah, yes, you're right. For cloth with thickness for projects, I do the proxy and I skin the proxy there, and depending of the situation, I just transfer that to the final cloth. So because it's a transfer, even if they have the thickness, it will kind of work. And in the other hand, in some situations, I just kept this wrap. Especially I'm using lately the new proximity wrap. It's very, very fast, very efficient, and can go also for the GPU override. So that's the good stuff. So definitely it's a game changer. Before I was using the Chad Vernon one, the CB wrap, that it's also really, really good. But well, since I think it was 2020, I don't remember where was the proximity wrap added, but yeah, it kind of like took over my workflows since.
Yeah, the one issue I've had with the proximity wrap is that I very commonly use subdivided geometry as the wrap because I want this effect. Like I'm rigging cloth. What I'll do is I'll make a clothing. What I'll do is I'll make a mesh. I'll make my cage, right, with vertices where I want my controls to be. And then I want to subdivide that and then use the subdivided mesh as the wrapped deform mesh. Mm-hmm. Now, unfortunately, I mean, that is, you can deal with that with prox wrap, but it sets it up incorrectly to begin with because it's going, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, it goes and grabs the orig shape to essentially use as its base. And the problem is that the orig shape is not subdivided.
See,
so you can get around that because you can like rewire it to work properly. So it's not like you can't use prox wrap with that, but it is something that I've always found a little frustrating.
Which one are you using? The classic wrap? No way.
No, sometimes I use the classic wrap, but no, I'm saying like I do sometimes use prox wrap. It's just kind of a pain.
Oh, well, I mean, you should then try the Chad Vernon one. It's still really, really, really good.
And even classic wrap, which is of course known to not exactly be fast, right? Even classic wrap is actually pretty usable in some circumstances. If you have, for instance, a fairly low number of vertices where you're getting a lot of the look of your surface out of subdivision. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's lots of cases where classic wrap is not the right thing to do.
Okay, I think we are unless we hit all the points we talked of at the beginning of Mike of the preparation for this. I don't know. Do you want to? There is something we're missing, or would like to add, or?
I mean, I don't know. I will say to anyone listening to this, like, obviously not here to be a sales pitch, but you should go to check out like notionalpipe.com and maybe talk to us about using Contour.
Okay.
And then eventually the ephemeral system, but that's not a product yet.
Okay, let's just stop the sharing screen so the people can see your face one more time.
Sure.
I'm just gonna change there. Okay, so yeah, that was a really wonderful conversation. I'm really glad you came again to the podcast and share all this. It's always very I don't know how you say, very encouraging to talk with you and to see your ideas and to talk and where you're going and have the feeling like there is something bright coming in the future with for animation that
you know,
it's
like,
really
I
really
certainly,
good, really for the spirit. I will say.
I'm really glad to hear that actually, because like, you know, sometimes, I mean, this is less true now where like I've had a chance to talk to a lot of people and it's evident that like these things matter to people, right? But they're definitely like when I started the blog, which was almost like, geez, it was like 3 years ago now, like time passes, man.
Oh yeah.
Maybe even more than that. No, it's more like 4 years now, I think.
I yeah, I would say yeah, around that.
Yeah, and I mean, I actually like really like haven't posted on it very much except to announce our streams because I'm so busy, right? But you know, I wasn't sure how many people were going to actually care, right? I was sort of like, maybe I'm going to be shouting into the wind, right?
No,
But thankfully, that does not
you
appear to be the case. People do care, so
yeah.
yeah.
I can testify that that's true, that it's making waves, and I hear your name like more and more often in circles, like oh the I mean the ephemeral rig, they I mean they don't, I mean that's something that you came like calling like ephemeral rig, and everybody like that's actually the now if someone want to describe this approach, they use ephemeral rig. They don't use like this toolet rig or mounting on a mounting controls or whatever. I mean, all the description, they use ephemeral rig, and they
And
don't.
it you know, like having a, you know, it's a weird thing, but like having a term for something actually matters a lot to whether people can sort of mentally, you know, discuss
Resign to
it, think
this,
about
and
it,
yeah,
you know, like
yeah,
if it's a kind of a weird thing about, you know, human
yeah,
cognition, I guess, but like it really matters whether you have a term.
yeah, definitely. Okay, so thank you so much,
Yep.
and thanks you for all the time, and I hope see you maybe in fourth episode or fourth time
Yep.
next, maybe
I
when
would be
some
happy
new
to.
releases, new stuff to come. Thank
Yep.
you.
Great talking to you. All right. Yep. Bye.